sports cars of all time, if not the greatest ever. It was voted 5th in car of the century, and its design is so remarkably consistent through its 60-year history, you could ask anyone on the street and they would immediately recognize that it's a 911. It's the benchmark for every other sports car in the world. I'm Austin and I like cars, and this week I want to talk about the 911. Now, most cars have humble beginnings, but even at the start, the 911 was designed to be a bigger, badder version of the 356. Now, there was nothing wrong with the 356, but by the 60s, it was just kind of time for it to be replaced. So Porsche got to work and ended up with the 901. In 1963, it debuted at the Frankfurt Motor Show, and it really was just a 356 with more. It had a little more room in the back for rear seats. It had a bigger engine with a 2-liter flat 6-cylinder instead of the 356's 4-cylinder. And although the public was skeptical of the 901 at first, when people got their first chance to drive it and really try it out, the 901 was an immediate hit. Except with Peugeot, who claimed they owned the rights to any 3-numbered car with a 0 in the middle. The creator of the 901, Ferdinand Porsche, obviously could not be bothered by this and added a 1 to the middle of the number to create the 911. Releasing in 1963, the 911's initial generation is a strong start that set a lot of traditions for Porsche in stone. Traditions like being rear-wheel drive and rear-engined. But it also started the tradition of selling a lot of cars. It sold so well that Porsche in 3 years was ready to create a whole new convertible version of it. But around this time, Porsche heard wind of a new US law that would make convertibles completely illegal. And even back then, the US market was extremely important. So in a bet to give people the open-top car they still wanted, they made a whole new style of car called the Targa. That's Italian for shield. I Googled that. And although the law never actually passed, the Targa ended up being a huge success for Porsche. To this day, some of the most desirable 911s from this generation are the Targas. Another notable release was the first 911 S variant. With a 160 horsepower engine, this thing ripped. And the S variants of 911s would continue to rip from then on. But the rippiest 911 of all the originals was the Carrera RS. This racing sport edition had 210 horsepower and was the first production car ever with a built-in wing that had the now legendary 911 Whaletail. In 1973, the classic 911 got its first major update, the bumpers. They would have been content to let the original look stay, but new safety regulations, again from the US, required good-looking cars to go from this to this. Ooh. But Porsche, with the same innovation that created the Targa top, managed to make a car look just as good, if not better. More important than new bumpers was Porsche creating a 911 that was capable of fighting supercars. The first 911 turbos appeared around this time, making 260 brake horsepower, and would be updated again to a 3.3-liter flat 6, making a life-threatening 300 horsepower. It was so insane that it got the car the nickname the Widowmaker. Now, this is kind of where internal Porsche naming is going to come up a little bit. Although they are all called 911s, the turbo version was called the 930, and then the non-turbos were still just the 911. If you're confused, don't worry, so am I. In 1988, we see the first real internal shifts of the 911 with the 964. This, in my opinion, is the closest we have to a bridge between the classic and modern 911s that we have today. Now, some of these modernized upgrades actually came trickling down from the Porsche 959, a hypercar designed by Porsche to advance automotive technology. So it got some of the comforts of the spaceship that was released in 1986, but it also got, for the first time in a 911, all-wheel drive. While the heavy rear-engine platform was a bit unruly at the best of times, with all 4 wheels bringing the car forward for the first time, it really helped stabilize the 911. And while it may have looked the same as the older generations, it was said to have up to 85% new parts. But Porsche, not being satisfied with making a nearly brand new car literally 5 years ago, they made the 993, releasing in 1994. But if, unlike Porsche, you're satisfied with my content, why don't you hit all the funny, wacky buttons like and subscribe, because it helps me know if I'm making something that's good or Although I have a love for the 930 original turbos, this is probably my favorite 911, and I'm not alone. The 993 managed to take the working muscular design and make it a bit sleeker and refined. As far as refinement goes, they finally managed to start tweaking out some of the nastier handling habits of the 911, such as lift-off oversteer. That means if you lift off the throttle while turning, the car will attempt to make the rear the front, also known as dying. Finally, the 993 was the first to use the GT2 trim level. It made 424 horsepower and was designed to be a race car for the road as a homologation special for the GT2 racing class. They only made 57 of them, and they're super rad. In 1999, the 911's traditional air-cooled flat six was starting to hit the limits of its power. Even the non-turboed variant was starting to make around 270 horsepower. Porsche was painfully aware of the 911's limits, and even trying to make other sports cars, such as the 928 with a giant V8 in the front. But 911 owners didn't want other Porsches. They wanted a 911. So they went back to Stuttgart and went back to the drawing board and came out with something completely new. The Porsche 996 did make some real changes. The body was elongated and flattened out for better aero. The engine ended up being water-cooled for the first time and managed to make nearly 300 horsepower for the base Carrera. But there was still plenty of other models to choose from, such as the Carrera S, the Carrera 4S, the Carrera Turbo, and even the first GT3, which is like your entry-level Porsche race car for the streets. It had different aero, a faster, naturally aspirated engine making 360 horsepower, better suspension, the works. And I know I was talking about a bridge between the two earlier, but this is also the start of not just the modernized 911, but modern Porsche. They were finally starting to make some real money with a more complete lineup, including the Boxster and the Cayenne. Although 911 sales never really slacked, now had some siblings to give it some room to go crazy. And in July 2004, we got a little taste of that crazy because the 997 was released when I was 3 years old. Coincidence? Probably. The 997 took on a lot of the complaints from the updated 996 and changed it up a little bit. It went back on the new teardrop design and went back to the classic circular style headlights. It made the interior more familiar to the cars from before. They even brought back the Targa for the first time since 1989. They really wanted to impress old 911 buyers. They also introduced the new 3.8 liter flat six making 350 horsepower in the Carrera S, with the turbo making 487 horsepower. I cannot stress enough how impressive this honestly is. It feels like economy cars these days are making 400 horsepower. We are so warped on what a high horsepower car really is, but the 911 Turbo was and is a rocket. Towards the end of the 997's life, it also got the very first PDK transmission. PDK is shorthand for Porsche Doppelkupplungsgetriebe, also known as the Porsche dual clutch transmission system, which meant it shifted way faster. This has become the standard automatic transmission for the next generation 911. Released in 2011, the 991 is a titanic leap for the Porsche 911. Like I said before, the PDK was the standard automatic transmission. However, the manual transmission was pretty innovative too, being the very first 7-speed in a production car. Another innovative step was the 991's overall efficiency as a car. It got better MPG because of a more effective engine and more efficient aero panels. But if I'm honest, this is where purists for the 911 start to pull back a bit. But I'll defend the 991. Even the electric steering, it's not the same as a hydraulic, but it's still fantastic. And it's as reliable as a sports car can be. Plus, if you ever wanted a special 911 created just for you, the 991 is perfect. Because this generation has 27 different trims to choose from, and that is not including automatics versus manuals, which I think they count. I think that would bring it over 40. These different trims include the 690 horsepower GT2 RS. And although it's definitely the last gen car, it'd be pretty hard pressed to tell the difference between the 991 and the current gen 992. Because in 2020, Porsche announced their greatest 911 yet. I'm sure people have felt like this before, but it feels like we're hitting the limits of the 911 as a platform here. The base Carrera makes 380 horsepower, while the top of the line Turbo S makes 641. And because it's a 911, Porsche literally cannot help themselves and has already made some exclusive special variants like the Sports Classic, a rear-wheel drive manual-only turbocharged variant, created to be an ultimate on-road experience for the 992. But the ultimate off-road experience can be found with the Dakar Rally Edition, a lifted all-wheel drive 911 for rallying. Speaking of Porsche race cars, in this time of turbocharging and electrification, Porsche is still willing to give us a GT3, a 4-liter, flat-6, naturally aspirated 911. It may not be the fastest of the 992s in a straight line, but it could very well be the last in a 911, and it's one of the last naturally aspirated sports cars ever. Because as a 911, it stuck to its guns and followed tradition. and made history on the way. Now, I've barely had enough time to go over everything. Not only did every single generation have a plethora of rare variants and race cars to skim over, they also changed a lot with production as time went on. Engines would get faster, the body would change a little bit, especially with the older models like the original 911. And I didn't get to talk very much about cars that are related to the 911, such as the 959, which I only got to briefly mention, the 911 GT1, which is such a hodgepodge of different ones, I didn't even think it was really worth bringing up, but it's still fantastic, and Porsche race cars are worth their own video. A lot of cars like to go on about their heritage, but very few have the history that can back it up. And selling over 1 million cars in 2017, there's even fewer that can claim to have the success that the 911 had. Thank you so much for watching. This was a pretty fun video to make. Honestly, I learned a lot. I learned a lot more than I did in the last two. I was not the most knowledgeable about the 911. Now I feel that my brain has expanded. I'm talking from the cuff here, but I do intend to keep doing videos on this channel. The format for now is going to be a video talking about the topic and then kind of a list video or whatever I want to do with it. I'm not really sure what all I want to do in this channel yet now that class is over. All I know is that I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to do my best to make a video that hits 1,000 views. And we'll go from there. Anyways, I'm Austin. I like cars. If you like cars too, make sure to check out my other videos. Comment below on what car you want me to do next, if there are any. Hope you have a wonderful day or night. I don't know when you're watching this. Bye.